Hello Year 5, Miss Warren here. I hope you are all well. I want to say a massive thank you to all of you that are sending in your English work for your compound and complex sentences for this week. And now today we're going to be looking at the use of relative clauses and embedded relative clauses. So let's get into it.
So I'm going to start off by saying a massive thank you to all the children that sent in their beautiful poetry work over the last few days. I've taken a few screenshots of some of the work that I've seen sent through to Year 5 email. And I want to say a massive thank you to all the children that also recorded themselves performing their poetry as well. It was beautiful to see that too. So here is some of the work that some of you in Year 5 have sent in to me. So again, great work guys. I'm going to award you all a Class Dojo point for creativity, and now let's move on to today's video. So this is the starter task. I would like you to place in verbs which are doing words into this paragraph so it makes sense. So I'm now going to try and read this paragraph out, and then once I've done, what I'd like to do is I'd like to pause the video here, write down this paragraph and include the correct verbs, so the correct doing words. So it's now my turn. I'm going to read it out. Bob Lucas out at space and. A moment later, 20 shooting stars across the sky and the most extraordinary scene. They in dark space. Bob at the picture in front of him and for others to come too. Others to what was happening and they all together. God, that was hard. So what I'd like to do again is pause the video here, write down this paragraph and include the correct verbs, doing words into this paragraph. You might want to speak it out to yourself again just to hear where those verbs might need to go. So pause the video here, it's now your turn. Okay, welcome back. Hope you've had some time to place in the correct verbs, and now it's time to move on and check. So, Bob Lucas looked out at space and wondered. A moment later, 20 shooting stars shot across the sky and the most extraordinary scene appeared. They sparkled in dark space. Bob gazed at the picture in front of him and called for others to come see too. Others ran to see what was happening and they all watched together. So you might have different verbs or doing words to the ones I've included into this paragraph, but it just goes to show how confusing and how silly sentences seem without including those verbs. And that is why we need to make sure that when we're writing our sentences, we include those verbs for them to make sense. Okay, let's move on. So today we're going to learn how to use relative clauses. Now again, it's to make our writing more interesting and engaging, and we're going to be varying out those sentence types when we go into write. The key vocabulary for today is relative clauses, main clause, relative pronouns, and extra information. Okay then, so what is a relative clause? Pause the video here and have a think for me. Okay, welcome back. Hope you've had some time to think about what a relative clause is, and now it's my turn to explain to you what it is. So a relative clause can be used to give additional information about a noun, which is a person, place, or thing, without the need to start a new sentence. So a relative clause starts with a relative pronoun. So these are the relative pronouns. Who, that, which, whose, when, and where. So who is used for people, that for people, animals, and things, which animals and things, whose, possessions, when, time expressions, and where, places. So a relative clause can go in the middle of a sentence, which is an embedded relative clause, or the end of one. So here's two examples. Bob Lucas, comma, who was an astronaut, comma, was in the ISS. Bob Lucas was in the ISS was the main clause there, and I've added additional information about Bob Lucas in the middle of that sentence, encasing it with commas. Venus is the hottest planet, comma, which is surprising as it's not the closest. What I would suggest you do now is pause the video here and write down that relative pronoun table so you have that for later on. Okay, let's move on then. So, just a top tip for relative clauses. When writing relative clauses, you need to punctuate the extra information. So, for example, the sky, comma, that was dark, extra information, comma, was speckled with stars. So I have my main clause, the sky was speckled with stars, and I've added extra information about the sky, which I've encased with commas. Then again, I've got, for the second one, the sun is a star. That is a main clause that makes sense by itself. Comma, which is the centre of our solar system, is additional information. The third one again, in the ISS, comma, where Bob Lucas is currently staying, comma, astronauts can float. In the ISS, astronauts can float. Main clause makes sense by itself. Where Bob Lucas is currently staying is additional information, again encased with commas. So remember, that is a really big top tip for relative clauses, so I probably suggest writing that down for me. So I am now going to write a sentence ending with a relative clause. So I'm going to start off by writing a simple sentence, Earth orbits the sun. Now I'm going to think of some extra information about the last noun in that sentence, which is, for me, the sun. So I know that the sun is also a star. So Earth orbits the sun, comma, which is also a star, full stop. Now I'm going to write a relative clause that is embedded, an embedded relative clause in the middle of a sentence. So again, I'm going to start off with a simple sentence. So Saturn is a gas giant. Now I want to include extra information about Saturn because that's why I think my embedded relative clause would probably sit the best. So I'm now going to think about what things I could write about Saturn. What do I know already about Saturn? Well, I know Saturn has got rings that go around the outside of it. So I could instead have this. So instead I could have Saturn, comma, that has rings around it, comma, is a gas giant. My main clause is just separated with additional information that I've included in the middle of it. If I took that relative clause out, it would still make sense. And I've included my relative pronoun that, which is obviously for people, animals, and things. Now have a think about this question. Does this sentence that's including a relative clause make sense? So Bob Lucas, who floats in the ISS? Pause the video here and have a think about that for me. Okay, welcome back. Hope you've had some time to think about that question. And now let's have a bit of a think about it. Now, we include a relative clause to add extra information, which I've done. So I've added extra information about Bob Lucas. But Bob Lucas is not a sentence. A sentence needs to include a verb. We need to make sure we have a verb in a sentence. So we need to have Bob Lucas doing something. With relative clauses, if you're going to make it embedded, the best suggestion I can offer you here is write a simple sentence down, then think about where you're going to add in extra information about the noun, and then include the relative clause in then afterwards. So I'm going to have Bob Lucas is an astronaut, is being my verb. So Bob Lucas, comma, who floats in the ISS, comma, is an astronaut. That sentence now makes sense. Okay, remember that when you are writing your own relative clauses down, maybe start with a simple sentence first, then include your extra information afterwards. Okay, let's now move on. So can you identify the relative clause in these sentences for me? So the sentences are 1. Mercury is super hot during the day when it is facing towards the sun. 2. Jupiter, which is a gas giant, is the largest planet in our solar system. And 3. Astronomers who explore space have found other stars have planets orbiting them. So pause video here, write down those sentences and underline the relative clause for me. Okay, hopefully you've had time to identify the relative clauses in these sentences, and now it's time to check through your answers. Mercury is super hot during the day when it is facing towards the sun. When being my relative pronoun. 2. Jupiter, which is a gas planet, which being my relative pronoun, and that being my relative clause, is the largest planet in our solar system. And the third one, astronomers, who being my relative pronoun, explore space, have found other stars have planets orbiting them. So well done if you got all those right. Now remember what I said about making sure we have punctuation around our relative clauses. Can you now punctuate these sentences for me? So pause the video here, write down those sentences and punctuate them properly for me. Remember what I said about including punctuation surrounding an embedded. Remember what I said about embedded relative clauses. The punctuation needs to be surrounding the extra information. So pause the video here, write those sentences down and punctuate them correctly for me. Okay, welcome back. Hope you've had some time to punctuate those sentences for me, and now it's time to check through. So the first one, astronomers are looking for exoplanets, comma, which are similar to Earth, full stop. Which relative pronoun, and obviously you can identify that you need a comma before them. One of the 5 sun-like stars, that being my relative pronoun, is in our galaxy, comma, could have Earth-like planets. So the main clause in that sentence is one of the 5 sun-like stars could have Earth-like planets. That is in our galaxy is extra information. And the final one, the big red spot on Jupiter, where a hurricane has been raging for more than 400 years, where being my relative pronoun. Remembering when we're adding extra information, which is our relative clause, we need to encase that with commas. So the big red spot on Jupiter, where a hurricane has been raging for more than 400 years, comma, could fit 3 Earths side by side. Okay, well, hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you managed to correctly punctuate those sentences for me. And now let's move on. So what I'd like you to do is now write a relative clause about Bob Lucas, an astronaut, space, planets, stars, aliens, moons, etc. Just making sure it's about space. So my relative clause is about Mars. So now I've found some extra information about Mars. So one of Mars's moons, which is called Phobos, is moving towards the planet. So that there is extra information about one of Mars's moons. And obviously one of Mars's moons is called Phobos. And that moon in particular is moving towards the planet. Now I'm looking to the right-hand side. Could I include an expanded noun phrase? Or maybe I could include an adverb to enhance the verb to tell me how it has happened. So I'm going to look in this sentence, trying to find one of my verbs. Now moving is my verb. Well, how is the planet moving? Is it moving quickly, slowly, rapidly, frantically? So now I'm going to think of an ly ending word, which is an adverb, to add to my sentence, as well as an expanded noun phrase. And I'm probably going to add my expanded noun phrase before the noun planet. So this is my new sentence. One of Mars's moon, which is called Phobos, is slowly moving towards the red, dangerous planet. So there I've got my relative pronoun, which is which, with my relative clause. Slowly, my adverb describing how it is moving, and I've got red and dangerous as my 2 adjectives. So when you go to write your own sentences about space, you can have an embedded relative clause or a relative clause that goes at the end of the sentence. Just make sure that you have a main clause to start with and then you add additional information afterwards. If you're struggling to think about what type of sentence you could use or a simple sentence, if you're struggling to think of a simple sentence or a sentence just about space, what you could do is you could Google some space facts and then use those to create a relative clause if you'd like. So pause the video here, it's now your turn, off you go. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you've created a fantastic relative clause about space, and now it's time to move on. So now I think you are going to be absolutely whizzes at identifying relative clauses. So now I'm going to put your relative clause knowledge to the test with a quiz. So I want you to go to Quiz Shed, which is following that link there. And then when you're in the menu, you have to type in a quiz to play and you type in this quiz code. There will be 15 questions about embedded relative clauses and just relative clauses for you to answer. Now, this quiz is something that you can keep on coming back to if you feel like you need to refresh yourself on what a relative clause is or where to put relative clauses. So there is no time frame on when you need to complete this quiz for, but I will probably be checking on for Friday's lesson as to who's completed what and give a few shout outs and a few dojo points for those who have completed the quiz so far. When you get onto Quiz Shed, it will look like this. So you will first off need to start off by signing in, or you can click on play a game if you're signed in already. So then you will then click down to Quiz Shed down here, and then you would type in the quiz code. Now the quiz code is here. Obviously I've done it because I've created the quiz, so I know what the quiz code is. And then I can click play, and then I can add a number of questions. I'm going to click all questions, and you can order them however you'd like, and then you would click to start. So these are your Chili challenges for this lesson. Chili 1, I want you to identify the relative clause in the sentences and then write 2 of your own relative clauses down. So maybe make them about space. Chili 2, I want you to punctuate the sentences correctly. Write 4 of your own relative clause sentences, making sure at least one of them is an embedded relative clause. And then Chile 3, I want you to do Chile 2. And then enhance the sentences by adding expanded noun phrases and adverbs to describe the verb. Now, Chile 1 and Chile 2, your sentences are on the next 2 slides. So this is Chile 1. So identify the relative clause, the sentences. Probably use 2 different colours to identify the relative clause and the main clause. And then this is Chile 2. These are your sentences. You will need to write them down and then punctuate the sentences correctly. So you might need a different coloured pen for your punctuation.
That is it for today's video. We have looked at how to use embedded relative clauses and relative clauses within sentences. Can't wait to see what you send into the Year 5 email. Stay safe, and I will see you tomorrow for another English lesson. Bye!